British commanders banned parachutes because they thought pilots would become cowards. That soldiers developed the 3-on-a-match superstition after watching snipers pick off the third man to light a cigarette. Or that France issued up to 0.75 liters of wine per soldier per day, roughly 3 standard bottles of modern wine. These aren't your typical World War I stories. Today we're examining the most bizarre, shocking, and downright unbelievable moments from the 5 major armies of the Great War. Some of these facts are so strange they sound like fiction, but every single one is documented history. British Army's bizarre superstitions and deadly honor code. Let's examine how the British Army's obsession with honor created some of the war's most devastating decisions. The Royal Flying Corps made a choice that sounds like it came from a comedy sketch rather than military headquarters. British pilots were forbidden from carrying parachutes during combat missions. This wasn't because parachutes were too heavy or too expensive. The Air Board's reasoning was that having an escape option would make pilots cowardly and encourage them to abandon perfectly good aircraft that could still make it back to base. No parachutes were issued until late 1918, meaning thousands of aviators died in crashes they could have survived. British commanders preferred dead heroes to living pilots who might retreat. This rigid honor-over-survival mentality infected every level of the British military. Soldiers developed their own elaborate superstition systems to cope with the absurdity. The 3-on-a-match belief became widespread after soldiers noticed that lighting 3 cigarettes from one match gave enemy snipers enough time to spot and target the third man. Others insisted on wearing the same unwashed socks for weeks, believing clean socks would bring death. Some units performed pre-battle rituals that involved passing around photographs of sweethearts exactly 7 times while reciting made-up Latin phrases. These ceremonies often took longer than actual battle preparations, but commanders allowed them because superstitious soldiers fought harder than terrified ones. The British PALS battalion system created one of the war's most heartbreaking disasters. Entire neighborhoods, football clubs, and factory workforces enlisted together with the promise they could serve alongside their friends. The Accrington PALS battalion recruited 700 men from the same small town. On July 1, 1916, during the first day of the Somme offensive, 584 of those men were killed or wounded within 20 minutes. The town of Accrington lost nearly every male between the ages of 18 and 35 in less than half an hour, with entire streets of families receiving death telegrams on the same day. British equipment failures reached levels that bordered on criminal negligence. Gas masks presented a deadly problem where early models fogged up so severely that soldiers wearing them became completely blind within minutes. Many troops chose to risk poison gas exposure rather than stumble around unable to see enemy attacks. The masks also had a tendency to slip during combat, creating gaps that let in the very gases they were supposed to filter out. Silent raids became a desperate British specialty that sounds absurd but actually worked. Soldiers would remove their heavy boots and crawl across no man's land wearing only socks or barefoot. These missions required men to slither through mud, barbed wire, and corpses without making any sound. Some successful raids involved 50 men crawling 200 yards in complete silence, cutting through German wire with hand tools, and returning with prisoners. The technique was so effective that German sentries often couldn't detect British soldiers until they were already inside the trenches. Field Punishment No. 1 represented British military discipline at its most medieval. Soldiers guilty of minor infractions were shackled to wheels for hours in view of enemy fire, a punishment that caused lasting nerve damage. The practice continued even after military doctors reported that extended periods in this position caused permanent damage to soldiers' bodies. British cavalry charges persisted with shocking stubbornness well into 1917, long after machine guns had proven that horses couldn't survive modern warfare. The Cavalry Brigade at High Wood in September 1916 saw 150 mounted soldiers charge directly into German machine gun positions. Within minutes, nearly every horse was dead, and most riders were casualties. Yet, British commanders continued planning mounted attacks, convinced that the psychological impact of charging horses would break enemy morale. Shell shock statistics reveal the British Army's cruel contradiction regarding mental health. British soldiers suffered shell shock at rates nearly double those of French or German troops, with over 80,000 documented cases. Yet the British military executed more of their own soldiers for cowardice and desertion than any other army in the war. Many men shot for cowardice were actually suffering from what we now recognize as severe PTSD. Medical officers who tried to diagnose shell shock were often overruled by commanders who insisted that British soldiers didn't break down mentally. The result was that traumatized men were either shot by firing squads or sent back to the front lines without treatment. Trench foot became such an epidemic that some British units reported more casualties from foot rot than from enemy action. The condition occurred when soldiers' feet remained wet and cold for extended periods, causing tissue to decay while still attached to the body. In severe cases, toes and entire sections of feet would turn black and fall off. Some battalions had over 30% of their men incapacitated by trench foot at any given time. Military doctors eventually realized that rotating dry socks and whale oil treatments could prevent the condition, but supply shortages meant many units went months without clean, dry footwear. The ban on Tommy cookers created one final absurd hardship for British soldiers. These small portable stoves allowed troops to heat food and water, but commanders discovered that enemy snipers could spot the tiny flames from hundreds of yards away. Rather than develop better camouflage or safer heating methods, British command simply banned hot food at the front lines. Soldiers spent months eating cold bully beef, hardtack biscuits, and lukewarm tea. Some troops tried to heat food using body heat or by leaving tins in sunny spots, but these methods rarely worked in the cold, wet trenches. The irony was that German soldiers had similar portable stoves but used them with better concealment techniques, meaning they enjoyed hot meals while British soldiers shivered over cold rations just a few hundred yards away.